know the why human trafficking work is needed: to fight for the freedom of modern-day slaves. But love, passion, commitment isn't all you need to be an effective and successful anti-trafficking advocate. Learn the how. I'm Dr. Celia Williamson, Director of the Human Trafficking and Social Justice Institute at the University of Toledo. Welcome to the Emancipation Nation podcast, where I'll provide you with the latest and best methods, policy, and practice discussed by experienced experts in the field so that you can cut through the noise, save time, and be about the work of saving lives. Welcome to the Emancipation Nation episode 188. Today, my guest is Kyle Baker, and he really is an expert in human trafficking, particularly having worked with law enforcement, having trained law enforcement. He has a certified human trafficking course, and he has worked hundreds of commercial sexual investigations. So because he is a teacher, a trainer around the state of California, he has some lessons that he has learned over time about building relationships with law enforcement as we are advocates working in the anti-trafficking field, and some of the barriers on both sides, and maybe some of the ways that we could and law enforcement could work together better. So I think this is a very important conversation. So thank you so much for being here, Kyle.
Celia, thank you so much for having me, and good morning from California. It's 6 a.m. here. Excited to be here and chat with you a little bit about human trafficking today.
Yeah, so Kyle, first of all, tell us how you got involved in this particular issue.
So to be 100% honest, totally by fate in 2016. So in 2016, I was selected as a detective. I work for a police department in the Bay Area in California. Almost if you drew a line between San Francisco and Sacramento, I'm somewhere along that line. So right in the middle of a very, very busy area. And so in 2016, I was selected as a narcotics detective. And of course, I grew up watching all the cop movies, and I thought it was going to be the craziest, coolest thing. We're going to take down these huge drug kingpins and such. And one day my boss walks into me and he says, "Hey, Kyle, I have something for you." I'm like, "Oh, cool. You know what? What are we doing today? You know, what kind of drugs? Who is it? Where are we going?" And he's like, "Well, it's actually it looks like a human trafficking case." And I'm like, "Well, what is that?" And what had happened is one of my partners who usually worked those was out of town. And he said, "Hey, here's where we're at. We have a 15-year-old girl right now that's currently in juvenile hall for some unrelated charges. And she just disclosed to one of the counselors there that a couple of nights ago, she was taken to a hotel in a nearby city that started off in our city. And she was photographed, and she had those photographs put online, and there were drugs involved, and we're not really sure what's going on." So I said, "Okay, well, let me give it a shot." Well, sure enough, that was my first human trafficking case. And what it involved was a 15-year-old who had run away from home. She was picked up by two guys that kind of loosely knew her. She had sadly been involved in commercial sex work prior to that. And that night, they got a hotel room. She ended up texting one of her best friends who was in volleyball practice at a nearby school. They picked up a third guy, then picked up the second girl, and they all ended up in this really horrible, seedy hotel room. One of the girls watched one of the guys shooting heroin into his arm and asked to try it for the first time. And that led to a night of photographs and a night of commercial sex posting. Now, luckily, in that particular night, no commercial sex acts ended up taking place. However, here in California, they certainly met the threshold for human trafficking. And that was the first time I was really exposed to what human trafficking is, what it somewhat looks like, vulnerable types of populations, how individuals can truly manipulate others, and just how kind of prolific it is. So that's what launched me into this, and now has been my career passion for, the last 7 years, to where I've worked on a human trafficking task force, I've testified multiple times as an expert in court. I now travel and teach around the state of California for multiple organizations. I speak to community groups. It's been one heck of a ride, and I'm excited to be where I am now and truly sharing some of the successes, but more importantly, the failures over the years.
And so, Kyle, I mean, I could hear the initial passion in your voice about, I'm going to get in there and we're going to do these big cases, man. And that sounds so exciting and so cool. And then instead of like what you envisioned, something stole your heart and caused you to have this passion. But what was it about that experience that made you then, it changed the trajectory of your life, I guess, to do this?
So it was two things, and really, it was the two victims in that case. And what was really interesting, Celia, is the two victims in that case, the original one that was picked up as a runaway, and the one that came from the high school. So the runaway, she was what we've all spoken about many a times, where you see a lot of those red flags, those areas of vulnerability. She came from a broken home. She had abuse in her past. She had drug use. So she was kind of on one hand. On the other hand, the girl from the high school had none of that in her history. She came from a good home, good family. She had never been involved in commercial sex work. She had never been exposed to drugs.
Hey, before we continue the episode, I want to let you know of 3 courses I offer: Effective Case Management with Human Trafficking Survivors, the TNT Survivor Journey Groups, and the Best Life Human Trafficking Prevention course for girls that are at risk. Raising awareness around human trafficking is a great start. Hanging up flyers, having fundraisers, doing human trafficking presentations, or even joining an anti-trafficking coalition or commission or student group. But it simply isn't enough. If you or your group aren't touching the lives of survivors or those at risk in meaningful and healing ways, you're missing a critical component. I want you to get back to the reasons you joined the anti-trafficking fight in the first place. The reason you joined that coalition or that commission or that student group. You wanted to make a difference, but maybe you didn't know exactly what to do, and so presentations seemed doable. Why? Because you had the knowledge and skills to do it. Well, if you're really ready to get directly involved and help change the lives of others for the better, then this is an important message for you. I have almost 30 years experience working with survivors and studying the issue, and I'm circling back to help you become effective and confident in your ability to work with survivors of commercial sexual violence. I wrote a few books, developed some courses, and would love to train you on how to be involved directly. Just go to my website, celiawilliamson.com, and check out my webinars. Learn a little more about how you can become knowledgeable and skilled to actually work with survivors using my trauma-informed courses. And now, on with the podcast.
When I sat down and talked to both of them about their experience, the trauma that had occurred from that event was very apparent in both of them. And so that was the first time that I saw how human trafficking, how exploiters can truly affect victims. And for me, going from what I thought I was going to be doing, which was running around chasing drugs, I found that it's sad that this exists, but there's a huge, satisfaction in being able to do what we can, right, for those victims, because they're real. They're real people. There's faces, there's experiences, and there's trauma. So for me, I thought, you know what, this is, I think, maybe what I'm supposed to be doing. And it really just kind of took off after that.
Yeah, it's kind of difficult to look in a little young face. I say young face, teenagers, and, walk away to do something else. I mean, that's pretty hard to do. I can see how your passion took over. Did you happen to see, this question popped in my head out of the blue. Did you happen to see the movie Sound of Freedom?
I did.
Okay, because your experiences seem to match some of my experiences. And that movie really talked about really little kids in another country. I mean, what's your opinion about that?
Yeah, I thought you might ask that because I'm sure just like I've been getting tons of questions about it from family, from friends, from coworkers. And my message to that has been somewhat simple in that, cinematically, good movie. It kind of grips you and pulls you in. And I think that it's important in the sense that it does display some of the unfortunate things that happen in other countries. And I will never dispel that, and I will never try to minimize that. However, there's a big however with that, because the truth is it's not a reflection at all about what happens here in our country. And what I tell people all the time, especially when I'm speaking to community groups, is I promise you, no matter where you live, what city you're in, I don't care if it's rural, I don't care if it's huge urban, I don't care what the socioeconomics look like, I don't care about any of that. I promise you, you have seen victims of human trafficking or commercial sex crimes in your daily life, at Starbucks, at the grocery store, at wherever. And the truth is you're much more likely to be exploited by somebody who contacts you on social media and tells you you're pretty, we should go out and make money, than somebody snatching a kid off of the street corner. And so I think it's really important for folks here in the US. I love that there's the push and people are getting aware and they're more hungry for information. I think that's great. But in all reality, we have to understand that, there's a lot of built-in vulnerabilities in our young populations here in the US. And a lot of times, sadly, those young victims are out searching for something, and those exploiters know what that is, and they're able to capitalize on it. So overall, I mean, a good movie for what I think some of the things it accomplished. However, I think it's important for us here as moms and dads and brothers and sisters and teachers and just everyday folks understand what human trafficking looks like here.
I mean, 100% agreed. So I just like to ask people, because I don't want America running off thinking that that is what trafficking looks like. That is one piece, one sliver, but there's things happening in your own community that you could open your eyes to. So I'm so glad that you cleared that up. So let's talk about some of the law enforcement, things that they could do better, maybe some barriers, or how could we best collaborate with law enforcement and they collaborate with us?
Yeah, one of my favorite topics to talk about, because I've had to learn a lot over the years. And I'll kind of take this in two strokes. The first one being, I think overall, as a profession, we have progressed significantly over the years to where the message certainly is now to look at and treat commercial sex workers as victims, and understanding that the old adage of, well, they must be wanting to do that, or they could just pack up and leave. I think that we've come a long way learning from survivors, learning from victim advocates, learning from people like me that have fallen on my face a few times over the years. We've gained that understanding of that victimhood, that trauma, those trauma bonds. I think we're getting there. We're not all the way there yet by any means, but I think if you look, over the last couple of decades where we are now, we're progressing a little bit. But with that being said, one of the biggest pieces that, I truly preach and I harp on as much as I can, if you look at any, let's call it traditional law enforcement type of investigation, I'll use a robbery as an example. Well, if I go to the scene of a robbery, more than likely the way that call for service is handled here in California is probably the same that it's going to be handled in Texas or Oklahoma or Florida. The book is kind of written on how to handle a robbery as a police officer. We're still kind of writing the book on how to investigate human trafficking and commercial sex crimes, because it's so dynamic, because there's so much that goes into it. And the piece that I truly try to get across to police officers the most is we cannot do it alone as law enforcement. We cannot. And the approach of multidisciplinary collaboration has to be the lens that we look at this through. When I started working almost exclusively with human trafficking 6-7 years ago, I knew that these wonderful people called victim advocates existed. And we had sometimes had cross either training or cross, we would work with these folks on different types of cases, but it was never really intimately, it was never really proper. And as I started to crest these cases, I learned very quickly that there are some already built-in barriers between law enforcement and victims of human trafficking. And the truth is a lot of those are created by law enforcement over the years. For a long time, we treated commercial sex work and victims as prostitutes. And it's taken a long time, right, for us to start to gain that trust back. So I think that that's a huge component in understanding that a victim advocate can be very, very vital to gain that trust quicker because it's not somebody in uniform. It's not law enforcement. So that's definitely one of the barriers in this type of work is understanding that, us as law enforcement, when we take a case on, when we meet a victim, we got a little bit of work to do, right? And in gaining that trust. And one of the best tools to combat that is certainly working with folks from victim advocacy groups.
Yeah. Well, let me just comment on that. First of all, I love that you mentioned trauma bond because it can look very different to somebody who doesn't understand trauma bond. It looks like somebody who's participating in their, they want to do this, they want to be there. And so if you don't understand trauma bond, then you're looking at a picture of something that you're going to assess in the wrong way. I also love that you said, hey, I've made mistakes, fallen on my face. I certainly have. I remember back in the day doing some presentations and conferences where law enforcement was quite frankly offended if you said, hey, maybe that you aren't doing this. Maybe this is triggering. Maybe this is re-traumatizing people. Highly offended in my profession in social work, when we meet people and they say, hey, social workers screwed up my life, we go, yeah, I understand. So, we've come to accept that all of us aren't doing, what we should. We do the best with what we have, but when you know better, you do better. And so law enforcement coming to some realization that, we have some growth to do. But the key thing that you said so far was really it's multidisciplinary. And if if the listeners go back and listen to any of these episodes, they'll hear people say collaboration, multidisciplinary. Those are the people who are wise and know what to do. The people who talk about, I can do it, my agency can do it. Those are the people that really have some growing to do. So I'm just excited that you talked about multidisciplinary because that's really the way to be most successful. So let me let you continue. Any other barriers?
Yeah, and so I think that the other component to that is I certainly challenge my victim advocate friends to also understand that some of their perceptions of law enforcement or some of their past experiences shouldn't let them, not get to know their local officers and the investigators that they're working with, because that relationship I think is extremely key. I had a case, one that's adjudicated, the exploiter's currently in prison, where the first time that I met the victim, she was 18 years old at the time. And we came across her through some investigative steps. And that particular day where we first met her, we didn't have access to a victim advocate that day. And so we just kind of had to roll with it the best that we could. And she was certainly in that phase of the victim not wanting anything to do with law enforcement. She was branded and tattooed with her exploiters tattooed. She was dressed as you would expect somebody involved in this type of work to be. And she was very protective because she was bonded to her exploiter. Well, a few days later, her exploiter broke into her apartment as she was kind of going through this phase of trying to get away from him. He broke into her apartment, pistol whipped her new boyfriend, who was not involved in commercial sex or a pimp or an exploiter, held a gun to his head and ended up being arrested that night. And that incident kind of helped her get over that kind of hump of wanting to protect him. Well, so one of the very first things that I did was bring a victim advocate in on that conversation and that case. And that's one of those cool stories where post investigation, post court, et cetera, she actually got out of the life. So I credit that 100% to this amazing victim advocate that works for the DA's office here in the county that I work in. And it wasn't easy for her. It was definitely quite the road. So I wanted to throw that out there because, you know, those successful stories are really built around these relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, how do you've worked hundreds of these cases.
Mm-hmm.
How do you, Kyle, stay sort of like healthy? How do you take care of yourself? How do you see this, look into these faces,
Yeah,
and see this tragedy and what they've been through, and you know by now the hard road to healing that it's going to take, and what
sure.
how do you take care of yourself having seen all that?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. Well, the first thing is it took a lot of years to understand this truth and reality is that you are not going to be able to help everybody. And that is a difficult thing as somebody who's in a profession where that's kind of the guiding reason to why most cops get into this profession is that they want to help people in some way. But as you know, truly, quote, rescuing a victim, the truth is that a victim's never going to leave their situation until they're ready. We in this profession, in law enforcement, in advocacy, in social work, we can do all that we can. We can provide the steps, we can provide the path, but at the end of the day, the decision does end up having to lie with that individual. So for me over the years, when it comes to, my personal feelings, that's been the most difficult thing, honestly, is that I've met so many victims over the years that I want to just grab them and just take them out of the situation, put them somewhere safe and be like, hey, take a look from the outside looking in and look what you're doing to yourself and look what's happening. So once I've kind of settled into that and knowing that, hey, us collaboratively, we can only do the best that we can, that somewhat helped a little bit. But the truth is understanding that I do have a profession that I'm very passionate about, but I do have an entire life outside of my profession. And I think that that's really important. I have a family, I have young children, I have hobbies, we like to travel. And so I can't say that my brain always turns off when I'm not at work. However, I've learned over the years to kind of have that balance a little bit. And I think that that's extremely important.
Yeah, I mean, we can all take a page out of your book because I think a lot of people are trying to establish that work-life balance or trying to have some joy in their own life after they've seen this type of tragedy. So what would you recommend, to other people, particularly involved in law enforcement, the people who show up first, the first responders, and they see, what's happening? What would you advise them in terms of their own self-care or in terms of training they may need or anything that would help them do their job better?
Yeah, so I'll take the training on first. So I talked to a lot of police agencies, and I've been very fortunate over the years to talk to chiefs of police and higher ups at different agencies, especially in our area. And I cannot harp enough that the fundamental thing that we have to do for our police officers is we have to train them. And we have to specifically train our patrol officers, the guys and gals who are going to go to that call for service at a hotel at 2:00 in the morning when somebody calls and says, you know what? We saw this. It just doesn't look quite right. This girl, she looks really young. Like, what's going on? And so to train our officers and deputies across the country and be able to recognize these situations and understand how to properly investigate them. And the second thing that I always kind of throw in there is, okay, it's really great if you train your people. I think that's extremely important. And I'm a huge proponent that training, it should be from folks maybe like me that have had experience, that are cops, et cetera. But you should also have some training that comes from victim advocates. You should have some training that comes from survivors. So whenever I teach and train, I do everything that I can to have a survivor there to hear their story. Because, I mean, let's face it, Celia, I can talk about this stuff and I can share experiences, but when you hear it from the mouth of somebody that's lived it, totally different. So we have to train our officers, and then we have to have pathways in our police agencies on how to navigate these cases. So, okay, great. What if an officer does a traffic stop and it has all these red flags of some type of trafficking situation, but ultimately you can't get anywhere on that day. Nobody's talking to you. There's nothing to take anybody to jail for. The victim doesn't, or a perceived victim doesn't want to talk to you, and you end up having to let these folks go. Well, what's the next step? Who can you refer that to? So I think that's extremely important for police departments. Train your people and have pathways to navigate these cases. And then the last component to that, and this is something law enforcement has definitely improved on, is our wellness programs for officers. And here at the agency I work for Pittsburgh Police Department. We have a relatively robust wellness program, which we're continuing to grow, where we have access to peer support officers. We just recently built a brand new gym that we'll be doing on-duty workouts on, which I think is really important. And so it's this overall notion that officers have to take care of their mental health and they have to take care of their physical health. So that all comes into play, right? Because if I am a more fit officer and I'm a more mentally healthy officer, I'm going to be able to deal with these situations better. So it really all does link together.
So Kyle, if a police force or somebody who's advocating for police to be trained, I mean, do you do training outside of California?
Yeah, so I haven't had the opportunity to travel out of California yet, just because there's honestly so much training to be done here in California. However, I'm always certainly willing to do so. And on top of that, I really enjoy. I love training cops. I've been doing it for a decade, not only in human trafficking but other areas, and now human trafficking is what I teach and travel. Or I should say travel and teach now. But I love speaking and talking to groups that are not law enforcement as well. I've done several trainings in our county with different social work groups, with different community groups, with different advocate groups. And I think that that's really important because, again, I truly feel one of my missions now is to continue to break down, right, those barriers we kind of spoke about, that, cops care and they do a pretty good job. And sometimes we just need to be reminded as police officers that, these type of cases involve that collaboration. So I'm certainly always available. Definitely find me on LinkedIn, and I'll definitely shoot you, some of my contact information. But I'm a resource, and I love sharing things. And again, I got a whole lot of things that I learned from over the years.
Awesome. And just, can you let us know where somebody can contact you in case, they don't see what I might put in the description, but if somebody wanted to email you for a particular training or
Yep.
message you, would they go to LinkedIn, or do you have a site?
Yeah. LinkedIn's the best place to reach me. And you can just search my name, Kyle Baker, and human trafficking, and it'll pop up. Also my email address, which I'll give you, that you can toss out there. It's kbaker3071@gmail.com. That's the main email that I use for any human trafficking related stuff, outside of work kind of. But yeah, I'm definitely available, and I'm love to have conversations. I've gotten to speak to a lot of people, especially the last couple of years as I've started to train more and teach more, and gotten to advise on some pretty cool projects. And now, I'm super humbled and excited to be working with TAT, Truckers Against Trafficking. That's a new venture for me as a law enforcement advisor. They are an absolutely amazing organization all across North America that are truly boots on the ground and training. I think the last figure I saw was upwards of 1 million people in the trucking industry. They're now working with moving companies. They just have really taken over the transportation industry. And I'm super excited to work with them on, projects and getting to know them a little bit better. But they're definitely an organization that has kind of the right mindset and just true passion.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. And Truckers Against Trafficking is an amazing organization. I'm so glad that you are working with them. And thank you so much for your time today and for just telling us more about human trafficking, commercial sexual exploitation, what, law enforcement can do better, how we can work best with law enforcement, and your wisdom on collaboration, on always talking to victims and survivors and advocates, and always getting their input, always including them in the work that we do. That message came through loud and clear. So thank you so much, Kyle, again, and appreciate what you do, and glad that you are traveling with your family and trying to stay as healthy as you can when you can. So thank you. I appreciate your time.
Thank you very much. It was an absolute humbling opportunity. I loved being here. And the last thing I'll leave you with that I always share with folks when I'm speaking about human trafficking is we must not panic, but we must be aware. And I think that that's a very important thing as we move forward, is understanding what this stuff is. But let's not panic. Let's just be better and better educated.
That was Kyle Baker, and he is an expert in the law enforcement field, coming from that perspective, working with survivors of trafficking, and now teaching and training other law enforcement officers how to do the same while he is working, respecting, and honoring the experiences of other professions and the lived experience and expertise of lived experience survivors. So I think Kyle is the epitome of what we're looking for as we collaborate with law enforcement. He gives us hope for some of us that have been jaded, perhaps even, by our experiences with law enforcement, that there are law enforcement officers out there doing a great job, that are passionate about what they do, that seek more knowledge, that are interested in collaboration. And so let's do the same. Are you always seeking more knowledge? Are you respectful and honoring of other professions that are at the table? Do you respect and honor and include lived experience individuals? Do you collaborate? Do you even think collaboration is important? Because, as I said, if you listen to these episodes, one theme reigns loud and clear, and that is the importance of collaboration. If you look over any social movement, not only in the US, but around the world, you'll see collaboration. You can't do it alone. You have to allow others at the table to help, and then honor and respect what they bring to the table. That is the key to success. Until next time, the fight continues.
Let's not just do something, let's do the best thing. If you like this episode of Emancipation Nation, please subscribe and I'll send you the weekly podcast. Until then, the fight continues.